Lonely rancher paid $1 for a woman with a bag over her head. He married her after she told him her name. The sun hung low over the red dunes of Orlias 7, casting long shadows that twisted and bent like molten metal. Jonah's car wiped the sweat from his brow, squinting through the dusty horizon at his herd of genetically enhanced cattle. Each beast had been selectively bred to survive the harsh winds and scarce water of the planet. To Jonah's, they weren't just animals. They were companions, friends, and the only constant in his lonely life. Life on Orlias 7 was not for the weak. The air was thin, the nights cold, and the ground often shifted underfoot like it wanted to swallow him whole. But Jonah's was stubborn. He liked it that way. Out here, he didn't answer to anyone. He didn't have to make small talk or deal with bureaucrats from the central planets. The ranch was his world, and he ruled it quietly, alone. This morning, though, something unusual had caught his eye. A flicker of movement far off near the old colony ruins, a place that had been abandoned decades ago after the great collapse of the first human settlement on Orlias 7. Most locals avoided the ruins. They said strange things happened there. Machines would light up on their own, voices whispered when the wind was still, and sometimes travelers went in and never came out. Jonah's had always shrugged at such tales. Superstition had no place in a world built by hard work and grit. He hitched up his utility hoverbike and rode toward the ruins, the familiar rumble of the engine echoing across the barren landscape. As he approached, he saw the remnants of buildings, half buried in sand, their metal skeletons twisted by decades of storms. But the movement he had seen earlier was real. A group of people, dressed in patched uniforms and ragged cloaks, was gathered around a strange contraption. From a distance, Jonah's could make out cages and platforms, each holding objects, some alive, some not. Curiosity gnawed at him. He slowed his hoverbike and parked behind a mound of sand, observing. The crowd was murmuring excitedly. One figure stood on a raised platform, a loudspeaker in hand, calling out prices. Jonah's didn't recognize the language completely. Orlias 7 had become a melting pot of different human colonies, but he understood enough to grasp that this was an auction. He moved closer, cautious. The auctioneer held up a bag, large and opaque, with something, or someone, inside. The crowd fell silent as he raised a hand. "1 credit," he shouted. "Who will take her?" Jonah's blinked. Her, he hadn't expected that. The bag seemed to move faintly as though something alive was inside. He couldn't see the face. He couldn't see anything. His curiosity deepened. 10 credits, someone in the back yelled. Jonah's noted the number. Small, almost worthless. Most of the bidders were scavengers or traders, desperate for rare human artifacts or old tech from the ruined colonies. No one seemed to care about the figure in the bag beyond its mystery. Jonah's hesitated. Something about the way the bag shifted, like a heartbeat trapped in cloth, made him uneasy and fascinated at the same time. Without fully realizing why, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a single credit. He felt the weight of it. 1 credit. Almost nothing in this world, but enough to own a moment, a choice. 1 credit, Jonah's said aloud, stepping forward. The auctioneer looked down at him, squinting. "Do you even know what you're buying?" "I don't," Jonah's admitted, "but I'll take her." A few chuckles rose from the crowd. One man muttered something about the foolishness of lonely ranchers, but Jonah's ignored it. He handed over the credit and the auctioneer lifted the bag, handing it carefully to Jonah's. It felt heavier than he expected, like a bundle of secrets and silence pressed into his arms. The woman, or whatever she was, did not struggle. She did not speak. She simply waited, her stillness almost defiant. Jonah's climbed back onto his hoverbike, careful to keep the bag close. The journey back to the ranch was long and quiet. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples, and Jonah's found himself thinking of all the possible explanations. She could be a survivor of the old experiments, maybe a clone, maybe even someone dangerous. But every theory seemed to fail when he looked at the gentle way the bag moved, as if she knew she was finally safe. When he arrived at his ranch, he led the woman into the main building, careful to clear the animals out of the way. The cattle eyed the newcomer curiously, sniffing and lowing softly. Jonas set the bag down on the floor and looked at it. "This is it," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Let's see what you are." He knelt and gently untied the bag. As the cloth slipped from her head, Jonas's eyes met hers for the first time. She was human, definitely human, but unlike anyone he had ever seen. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and cautious. Her hair was dark and unkempt, streaked with dust and something that looked like dried salt. She did not speak, but her gaze held a question and perhaps a challenge. "Can you talk?" Jonas asked slowly, unsure how she would respond. Her lips parted and she said one word, clear and deliberate. "Myra." Jonas blinked. "Myra, okay, that's your name." She nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and sat quietly, her eyes scanning the room, the animals, him. Jonas felt an odd mix of relief and unease. She wasn't threatening, at least not yet, but there was something about her that suggested she was more than just a survivor of some old auction. Over the next hour, Jonas tried to get Myra to speak more, to tell him where she came from, who she was. But she said nothing beyond her name. She did, however, begin observing everything: the cattle, the machinery, even the way Jonas moved around the ranch. She seemed to absorb knowledge the way a plant absorbs sunlight. Jonas found himself fascinated. He had spent years on this lonely ranch, talking only to machines and animals, and here was someone who might finally make him think in new ways. Days passed, and Myra adapted quickly. She learned the routines of the ranch, fed the animals with a precision that impressed Jonas, and even started tinkering with some of the old machinery. One afternoon, she fixed a broken irrigation pump that had been malfunctioning for months, and Jonas felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in years: admiration. What exactly are you?" Jonas asked one evening, as they watched the twin moons rise over the horizon. Myra didn't answer immediately. She simply looked at him, thoughtful. Finally, she said, "I learn, I survive, I help." Jonas laughed softly, shaking his head. "That's a start, I guess." And so life began to change on the Carr Ranch. The lonely rancher had bought a mystery for one credit, and in return, the universe seemed to be offering him something priceless: a partner, a teacher, and perhaps a friend. But beyond the horizon, something stirred in the ruins of the old colonies. Those who had abandoned Myra long ago would not have forgotten her so easily. And as the nights grew colder, Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that the auction was only the beginning, and that Myra's presence on Orlia 7 might draw attention from forces far beyond their quiet, red-dusted world. Jonas looked at her as she carefully tended to the cattle, her hands gentle but confident, her eyes sharp and alive. He felt a strange hope, a possibility he hadn't dared to feel in years. "Maybe," he whispered to himself, "things are finally looking up." The stars above shone cold and distant, but for the first time in a long time, the ranch below seemed warm and alive. And Jonas Carr, lonely rancher of Orlia 7, felt the faintest flicker of excitement for the days to come. The mornings on Orlia 7 had a rhythm Jonas had learned to love. The twin suns would rise slowly over the red dunes, bathing the ranch in a soft orange glow. The wind whispered across the plains, carrying the scent of dust, sweat, and the faint tang of salt from the distant rock formations. It was peaceful, simple, predictable, but the rhythm had changed. Since Myra's arrival, every morning felt new, as if the world itself had shifted slightly. She moved with purpose, her eyes scanning everything: the animals, the machinery, the far horizon, always observing, always learning. Jonas watched her from the doorway of the main barn, leaning against the cool metal frame. He wondered how someone so quiet could feel so alive. "Do the cows understand you?" Jonas asked one morning, as Myra knelt beside a calf that had stumbled in the shallow dust. Myra's dark eyes glanced up at him. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she touched the calf's head gently and it immediately stopped struggling, nuzzling her hand. Jonas blinked. "I've never seen them do that," he muttered. He took a cautious step forward. "What did you do?" Myra finally spoke, her voice soft but deliberate. "I listened." Jonas chuckled, shaking his head. "Listened?" "Yes," she said simply, her eyes returning to the calf. "They talk, they just use a different language." Jonas stared at her. "Animals talking." That was impossible, or at least, that's what he had believed until now. He remembered the stories his father used to tell him about human ingenuity, about how humans could solve problems that machines could not. And maybe, just maybe, Myra was proof of that. The day passed in a blur of work. Myra fixed broken pipes, mended fences, and taught Jonas ways to organize the feed schedule more efficiently. For every hour Jonas spent laboring in the sun, Myra seemed to accomplish twice as much, all with a quiet focus that left him both impressed and unsettled. As the twin moons rose over the horizon that night, Jonas found himself sitting on the porch, looking out at the red plains. Myra moved around the barn, humming a tune he didn't recognize. For the first time, he wondered who she really was. "Where did you come from?" he asked carefully. Myra paused, turning toward him. Her dark eyes seemed to hold a weight, as if she were considering the answer for the first time in years. "I do not know," she said finally. "I remember nothing before the bag." Jonas frowned. "Nothing, nothing," she confirmed. "Only survival, only learning." The words hung in the air. Jonas didn't know what to say. Most people would have been frightened by a stranger with no memory, a stranger who arrived in a bag and seemed different. But Jonas had spent too long alone to be scared by mystery. Curiosity was a better companion than fear. Over the next few days, Jonas noticed something remarkable. Myra had a way of noticing patterns he had never seen. She could tell when a cow was sick just by the way it moved. She could repair machinery with parts that weren't even designed to fit. She had a solution for every problem, and every solution was unexpected, clever, and human. Jonas began to understand why she had survived the auction, and why she might be more important than any tool, any livestock, or any credit. One afternoon, as Jonas worked to repair a fence along the northern pasture, Myra approached carrying a small device. It was old, dusty, and clearly scavenged from the ruins. "What is that?" Jonas asked. "I think it can improve water flow," she said, eyes bright with purpose. "If I adjust it here and here." She moved the small levers and panels with surprising confidence. Sparks flew briefly, and then a soft hum filled the air. Water began to flow smoothly through the irrigation lines for the first time in months. Jonas stared, amazed. "How did you?" "I observed," she said simply, her voice calm and unwavering. "Everything has a pattern. Water, wind, soil, they speak if you listen." Jonas laughed, shaking his head. "I guess you really do understand everything." Her lips curved slightly. She did not laugh, but there was a spark of satisfaction in her eyes. Jonas realized that Myra was not just smart. She was extraordinary, not because of some experiment or modification, but because of her mind. Her ability to adapt, to understand, to solve problems. These were human traits amplified in ways he had never seen. The days turned into weeks. Myra became part of the rhythm of the ranch. She woke with the suns, worked with precision, and slept only when the animals had been fed and the tasks were done. Jonas, who had once believed he could survive alone, found himself depending on her. Not just for work, but for perspective. She saw things he missed. She asked questions he never thought to ask. She challenged him in small ways at first, then more boldly as her confidence grew. One evening, Jonas noticed her sitting quietly by the fence, staring at the horizon. He joined her, standing in the dust, watching the twin moons rise. "You're different," he said softly. Myra tilted her head. "Different?" "Yes," he said. I've never met anyone like you. You see the world in ways I can't. You make me think. You make me feel." Myra considered this, her dark eyes reflecting the pale moons. "I am learning," she said. "Learning to exist, learning to survive, learning to help." Jonas smiled faintly. "Well, you're doing more than that. You're changing everything here." There was a silence, filled only by the wind and the soft sounds of the cattle in the distance. For the first time, Jonas realized that Myra was not just a mystery to solve or a worker to train. She was something more, a partner in survival, a companion in solitude. And perhaps, if he allowed himself to imagine, a friend. The next morning brought an unexpected challenge. A group of scavengers from the neighboring settlement arrived, eyeing Jonas's livestock with greed in their eyes. They did not speak friendly words. Their intention was clear: steal what they could and leave chaos behind. Jonas had faced raiders before, but they had never been organized, never clever. He realized that without Myra's insight, they would have lost half the herd before nightfall. Myra observed the newcomers quietly, her eyes narrowing. "We can protect them," she said simply, "but you must trust me." Jonas hesitated for a moment. Trust was not easy for him, but he nodded. "Do what you must." Myra moved with surprising speed, setting traps and creating diversions. She understood the scavengers' patterns almost instinctively, predicting their movements and forcing them into positions Jonas would never have imagined. By the time the raiders realized what was happening, they were surrounded, trapped by their own overconfidence. Jonas watched in awe. Myra had turned a dangerous situation into a controlled one with calm efficiency. When the scavengers fled, defeated and bewildered, Jonas realized something profound. Human ingenuity, Myra's ingenuity, was unmatched. Out here in the most isolated corners of the galaxy, it could overcome almost anything. That night, as they repaired minor damage to the fences, Jonas finally asked the question he had avoided for weeks. "Myra, why me? Why here?" Myra paused, considering. "You see value in survival. You respect the land and the creatures. You do not waste effort. You are human." Jonas laughed softly, shaking his head. "That's it, just because I'm human." "Yes," she said, her voice calm but certain. "And humans are rare in this universe. We endure, we adapt, we create. You embody that." Jonas didn't know what to say. Her words were simple, but they carried weight. In a galaxy filled with advanced machines, alien civilizations, and abandoned experiments, humanity's greatest strength was its ability to survive, to think, and to create. And here was Myra, proof of that strength, standing before him. As the twin moons cast silver light over the red plains, Jonas realized something. Myra was not just a companion or a mystery. She was a reminder of what humans could be: resilient, inventive, and capable of facing any challenge. And for the first time in years, Jonas did not feel alone. The suns of Orlia 7 rose slowly, spilling pale gold across the endless red plains. Jonah's car was already outside, tending to the herd, his hands moving with the rhythm of years of experience. The cattle responded to his every gesture, lowing softly as if greeting him. But today, he wasn't alone. Myra was with him, kneeling beside a young calf, inspecting a small wound on its leg. Jonas watched her work, amazed at her calm efficiency. She handled the animals with a skill he had never seen, even after decades of ranching. The way she understood their movements, predicted their behavior, it was more than instinct. It was intelligence, observation, and something almost human. "You should show me how you do that," Jonas said, wiping the sweat from his forehead. Myra looked up, her dark eyes glinting. "There is nothing to show. You must observe. You must learn." Jonas laughed, shaking his head. "I've been observing all my life. You're still better than me." She didn't respond. Instead, she returned to the calf, her hands gentle but precise. Jonas realized that Myra had a way of seeing the world he had never known existed. Every movement of the cattle, Every pattern in the wind or the soil, she noticed. She could anticipate danger, predict behavior, and solve problems before they even appeared. For the first time, Jonas felt the stirrings of a partnership. It was subtle at first, the kind that grew from shared work and mutual understanding. Myra didn't speak much, and he didn't need her to. Their bond was built on action, on trust, and on the quiet rhythm of survival. One evening, as the twin moons rose high in the sky, Jonas and Myra sat on the porch of the main barn, watching the red sand stretch endlessly before them. "You've changed things here," Jonas said softly. "I don't know how I managed before you came." Myra tilted her head. "You survived," she said simply. "But you can do more. You do not see the patterns. You do not understand the land fully. I can help," Jonas chuckled. "You're not wrong. I suppose it's good to have someone to help, even if I'm not sure I need it." She didn't answer. Instead, she stared at the horizon, as if reading secrets hidden in the dunes. Jonas realized she was always observing, always learning, and he began to understand that her presence was not a mystery to be solved. It was a gift. The next morning, disaster arrived in the form of a dust storm. Winds swept across the plains, kicking up clouds of red dust that blinded the eyes and stung the skin. Jonas struggled to secure the cattle, but even with his experience, the storm was relentless. Myra moved beside him, her movements precise and calm. "We can protect them," she said. "Follow my instructions." Jonas nodded, and together they guided the herd toward a natural rock formation that provided shelter. Myra directed the cattle with quiet gestures and careful words. Jonas had never seen such control, such understanding. Even in the chaos of the storm, she remained calm, thinking 3 steps ahead, anticipating every problem. By the time the storm subsided, every animal was safe, and the ranch had sustained minimal damage. Jonas stood beside Myra, his chest heaving from exertion, but his mind was racing. He realized something profound. Myra was not just smart, she was brilliant. Her intelligence was practical, creative, and utterly human. You saved them," Jonas said, still catching his breath. "No," Myra replied. "We saved them together." Jonas felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. It was more than gratitude. It was recognition of partnership, of trust earned through action and shared purpose. Myra was teaching him that humans could overcome even the harshest worlds, not through brute strength, but through ingenuity, observation, and cooperation. In the days that followed, the bond between them deepened. Myra began to take on more responsibilities, organizing the herd, repairing machinery, and even teaching Jonas techniques he had never considered. She had an almost instinctive understanding of cause and effect, and her solutions were elegant in their simplicity. One afternoon, a young calf fell into a narrow ravine near the edge of the property. Jonas raced to the spot, but the slope was too steep and dangerous. Myra arrived moments later, assessing the situation. "We can lift it," she said calmly, "but we must move quickly. It is heavy, but not beyond our strength." Using a combination of ropes, pulleys, and careful coordination, they worked together to pull the calf to safety. Jonas marveled at her ingenuity. She seemed to understand mechanics, physics, and animals instinctively, combining them in ways he had never imagined. "You're incredible," Jonas said, once the calf was safe. Myra shook her head. "We are humans. We endure, we adapt, we survive." Jonas smiled, feeling a deep respect for her. She wasn't just a companion. She was a reminder of what humans could achieve when they worked together, when they trusted each other and relied on their minds. But not all challenges came from the environment. One evening, a small band of scavengers arrived, their eyes gleaming with greed. They had heard of Jonas's thriving ranch and came to steal livestock. Jonas knew he could handle them alone, but with Myra, they had an advantage he hadn't considered before. Myra observed the group quietly, her dark eyes analyzing every movement. "They will not expect our strategy," she said simply. Jonas watched as she set traps, created diversions, and organized the cattle in clever patterns. When the scavengers advanced, they found themselves surrounded by obstacles they could not navigate. The cattle, under Myra's direction, moved with intelligence, guiding the intruders into areas where their escape was cut off. Jonas realized that Myra's ingenuity was more than cleverness. It was a form of leadership. She could coordinate, plan, and execute strategies that surpassed anything he had seen. The scavengers fled in confusion, leaving Jonas's ranch untouched. "That was brilliant," Jonas said, still catching his breath. Myra tilted her head. "Brilliance is nothing without action. You must act. You must observe. You must learn." Jonas nodded, realizing that Myra was teaching him not just how to survive, but how to thrive. Her presence had transformed the ranch, turning it from a simple outpost into a place of strategy, intelligence, and human ingenuity. As the nights grew longer and colder, Jonas began to reflect on what Myra had brought into his life. She was more than a worker, more than a companion. She was a teacher, a partner, and a symbol of the potential of humanity. One night, as they sat by the barn under the silver light of the moons, Jonas asked, "Myra, do you ever think about who you were before?" She shook her head. "No, only what I can do now, only how I can survive, only how I can help." Jonas realized that her strength came not from memory or training, but from choice. She chose to live, to learn, to adapt. And in that choice, she exemplified everything that made humans special: resilient, creative, and endlessly resourceful. Over the following weeks, life at the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Myra and Jonas worked together seamlessly, facing challenges both environmental and human. They repaired broken fences, improved irrigation systems, and even began experimenting with new ways to enhance the livestock's survival skills. Jonas noticed a change in himself as well. He was no longer just a lonely rancher. He had a partner who challenged him, inspired him, and pushed him to think differently. He began to plan for the future in ways he hadn't considered in years. One afternoon, Myra approached him with a small mechanical device she had built from scraps found in the ruins. "This can detect water levels underground," she explained. "It will help us plan planting and feeding schedules more efficiently." Jonas watched as she demonstrated it. The device hummed softly, sending signals that allowed them to locate water in even the driest parts of the ranch. Jonas felt a thrill of pride and amazement. Myra's mind was a tool, a weapon, and a treasure, all in one. "You truly are remarkable," Jonas said, his voice filled with awe. Myra looked at him calmly. "I am human," she said simply. "And humans endure, we create, we survive. You embody that too." Jonas smiled, feeling a sense of connection he had never known. Myra was not just a stranger from an auction. She was a living example of human potential, a partner who could match his strength, amplify his skills, and inspire him to be better. As the twin moons cast their light across the red plains, Jonas realized that life on Orlia 7 had changed forever. He was no longer alone. He had Myra, and together they could face any challenge the planet, or the universe, threw at them. For the first time in years, Jonas felt hope, not just for survival but for something greater, a life filled with purpose, partnership, and the promise of human ingenuity. And so, under the cold stars and the silver moons, the lonely rancher and the woman from the bag began a new chapter of their lives, one built on trust, respect, and the extraordinary potential of humans. The winds of Orlia 7 had calmed, leaving the red plains quiet under the twin suns. Jonah's car was in the barn repairing a broken feeding trough when Myra entered, carrying a small, rusted box. She set it on the wooden table with deliberate care, her dark eyes flicking toward him. "What's that?" Jonas asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. Myra hesitated. For the first time, she seemed uncertain. "Something from my past," she said quietly. Jonas paused. He had always known there was more to Myra than the quiet strength she showed every day, but she had never spoken of her origins. The mystery had been part of her, part of the thrill, but now curiosity burned in him. "Show me," he said gently, "if you want." Myra opened the box. Inside were small devices, vials, and papers covered in neat, precise handwriting. Jonas had no idea what they were, but he could feel the weight of importance in every item. "These," Jonas began, picking up a small vial. "What are they?" "They were part of an experiment," Myra explained. "A long time ago. Humans wanted to see if I could survive anything, adapt, learn." Her voice was calm, but there was a hint of sadness in it. "I was tested, alone, abandoned. I do not remember before the bag, only survival, only learning." Jonas's hands trembled slightly. "You survived an experiment," Myra nodded. "I was designed to endure, to observe, to adapt. Others did not last. I did." Jonas stared at her, overwhelmed. She had arrived at his ranch as a mystery, a woman with no past, yet her skills, her intelligence, her ability to think ahead now made sense. She had not simply learned from the ranch. She had been trained by the universe, shaped by trials humans could hardly imagine. "So everything you've done here, the irrigation, the animals, the traps, that's just part of who you are?" Jonas asked slowly. "Yes," she said. "I observe, I learn, I act. You see, the world is patterns. Humans, we notice patterns. We survive because we can think, adapt, and create." Jonas realized something profound. Myra wasn't just intelligent. She was proof of something he had always believed deep down. Humans were remarkable. Even in the harshest corners of the galaxy, even against impossible odds, humans could endure. Humans could think. Humans could change the world. For weeks after this revelation, Jonas noticed a subtle shift in Myra. She seemed more confident, moving with purpose beyond the ranch, experimenting with ways to improve everything around them. She built devices to measure soil moisture, redesigned water channels to reduce waste, and even taught Jonas how to read the wind, predicting sandstorms before they arrived. Jonas marveled at her ingenuity. Every day he saw human potential in action, in ways he had never imagined. Myra was more than a worker, more than a companion. She was a living testament to what humans could achieve. One evening, as the twin moons rose high in the sky, Jonas and Myra sat outside the barn, the soft light casting long shadows across the red sands. "Do you ever think about the people who tested you?" Jonas asked gently. Myra shook her head. "No, they are part of the past." "I survived, that is enough," Jonas nodded. "And what about the future? What do you want?" Myra considered this, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "To live, to learn, to help, to be human." Jonas felt a deep respect for her. In a universe that often valued machines, aliens, and technology over simple human ingenuity, Myra was a reminder of something far more powerful: the human spirit. It was not just her intelligence or her skills. It was her choice, her will, her ability to endure and create. The next morning brought an unexpected challenge. Scouts from a nearby alien settlement arrived, curious about the thriving ranch. Jonas had faced humans before, but aliens, that was new. The scouts were sleek, tall, and their eyes glimmered with intelligence beyond his understanding. They spoke a strange language, their movements precise, almost mechanical. Jonas felt unease creeping in. He knew he could handle livestock and raiders, but these beings were different. They weren't here to steal, they were here to observe. Myra watched them quietly, analyzing every gesture. "They are studying us," she said. "They want to see what humans are capable of." Jonas frowned. "Us? They're studying me?" "No," Myra said. "You and me together. They notice the patterns humans make, our ingenuity, our adaptability, our courage." Jonas's heart raced. "And if they don't like what they see, they will underestimate us," Myra replied. "And that will be their mistake." For days, the scouts lingered near the edge of the ranch, observing from a distance. Jonas tried to continue his work, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Myra, however, moved calmly among the animals and machinery, never showing fear. She used the observation of the scouts to improve the ranch further, anticipating their moves, designing obstacles, and creating solutions that left Jonas in awe. One afternoon, a scout approached the fence, stepping forward cautiously. Jonas braced himself, unsure how to respond. Myra stepped forward, standing between him and the alien. Her posture was calm, commanding. "You want to see human ingenuity," she said in a clear voice, surprisingly confident. "Watch carefully." She began to direct the animals in a way that no one had seen before. The cattle moved in patterns, herding themselves as if following an invisible strategy. Machines activated automatically, feeding, watering, and monitoring the herd. The alien scout tilted its head, clearly impressed. Myra turned to Jonas, smiling faintly. "They are learning," she said. Jonas felt pride swell in his chest. This was not just about survival. This was about proving the value of humans in the galaxy. Myra had taken the skills humans had always possessed, observation, ingenuity, resilience, and amplified them, showing that even one human could make a difference beyond imagination. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Jonas realized something he had never admitted to himself. Myra was not just a helper or companion. She was extraordinary. She embodied everything humans could be when given freedom, trust, and purpose. That night, around a small fire in the barnyard, Jonas asked the question that had been on his mind for weeks. "Myra, why me? Why here? Why this ranch?" She looked into the fire, her expression thoughtful. "You believe in survival, you respect the land, you value life. You are human, and humans endure, we create, we adapt. You embody that. That is why I chose this place. That is why I stayed." Jonas felt a lump in his throat. He had spent so many years alone, thinking survival was enough, but Myra had shown him there was more. There was ingenuity, partnership, and the power of human potential. Over the following weeks, Jonas and Myra continued to improve the ranch. They repaired broken irrigation channels, strengthened fences, and experimented with new ways to enhance livestock health. Myra's devices and observations were unmatched. Jonas began to see the future in ways he had never imagined, thinking not just of survival, but of growth, innovation, and expansion. One day, Myra approached him with a small mechanical device she had built from scraps in the ruins. "This will help us measure water levels underground," she said. "We can plan planting and feeding more efficiently." Jonas watched as she demonstrated it. The device hummed softly, sending signals that allowed them to locate water in even the driest parts of the ranch. Jonas felt a thrill of pride and amazement. Myra's mind was a tool, a weapon, and a treasure all in one. "You truly are remarkable," Jonas said. Myra looked at him calmly. "I am human, and humans endure. We create, we survive. You embody that too." As the twin moons cast their silver light over the red plains, Jonas realized that life on Orlia 7 had changed forever. Myra's past, her intelligence, and her survival skills were not just a mystery, they were a revelation. And together, they represented something larger: the ingenuity, resilience, and power of humanity in a universe that often underestimated it. Jonah's car, once a lonely rancher, felt a profound hope for the first time in years. With Myra by his side, he realized that humans were more than survivors. They were creators, thinkers, and innovators. They could face any challenge, outsmart any opponent, and thrive even in the harshest worlds. And under the pale moons, Jonas understood the truth. Myra's presence was not just a gift. She was a proof of humanity itself. The red plains of Orlia 7 stretched endlessly under the twin suns, bathed in a soft, golden light. Jonah's car stood at the edge of the northern pasture, watching his herd move with ease, guided by the invisible rhythm Myra had established. For the first time in decades, the ranch felt complete, not just a place of work, but a home alive with life, purpose, and ingenuity. Myra moved beside him, adjusting a small irrigation panel with a precision that made Jonas smile. Even after weeks of working together, he still marveled at her focus, her intelligence, and her uncanny ability to anticipate every problem before it even appeared. She had transformed the ranch, yes, but she had also transformed him, teaching him to see beyond survival into strategy, creativity, and hope. "You've changed everything," Jonas said softly, his voice filled with wonder. Myra didn't look up immediately. She continued her work, her hands steady, her eyes sharp. "I only help," she said finally. "You do the rest. You are human. Humans endure. Humans adapt. You embody that." Jonas shook his head, smiling. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple," she replied, her voice calm. "Observe, learn, act." Jonas turned to her, the wind ruffling his hair. For the first time, he felt the courage to speak what had been building in his heart for weeks. "Myra, I can't imagine life here without you. You've shown me more than survival. You've shown me everything humans can be, and I want us to face it together. Always." Myra paused, her dark eyes reflecting the pale light of the sun's. For a moment the world seemed to shrink to the two of them, the herd and the endless horizon. Then she smiled faintly, a rare gesture that lit up her face. "I want that too," she said softly. Jonas felt a warmth he had not known in years. For decades he had lived alone, thinking that solitude was enough. But Myra had shown him that partnership, trust, and shared purpose were worth far more than mere survival. He reached for her hand, and she took it without hesitation. The decision to marry was not sudden. It had grown from weeks of working together, sharing challenges and learning from each other. But as Jonas and Myra stood together, feeling the life around them, it seemed inevitable. Two humans shaped by trials, united not just by companionship, but by admiration, respect, and the shared pursuit of ingenuity. The preparations for the ceremony were simple but meaningful. There were no formalities, no bureaucratic approvals, just the land they had tamed, the animals they had nurtured, and the small community of settlers and travelers who had begun to gather around the thriving ranch. Myra built a small structure from salvaged metal and wood, decorating it with patterns inspired by the land, the skies, and the herd. Jonas contributed what he could: flowers he had cultivated, tools polished to a shine, and his quiet presence. On the day of the ceremony, the red plains glowed under the rising suns. The herd gathered near the structure, some guided by Myra's silent commands, others curious about the unusual activity. Jonas looked at Myra, dressed in a simple gown she had fashioned from light, breathable fabric, her dark hair flowing freely. She looked at him, her eyes calm but full of life. They stood together, hands joined, hearts aligned. Jonas spoke first. "Myra, when I bought you for one credit, I never imagined the gift I would receive. You've taught me to see, to think, and to believe. I vow to stand beside you, to learn from you, and to face every challenge together." Myra's voice was steady, filled with conviction. "Jonas, I have survived everything, endured everything, and learned everything I could. But with you, I have discovered something more: partnership, trust, respect, and now love. I vow to stand with you, to learn with you, and to create with you, no matter what the future brings." The air was still, as if the universe itself paused to witness their vows. The suns cast long, golden shadows across the plains, illuminating a bond forged not in luxury or ceremony, but in hardship, ingenuity, and shared purpose. As they sealed their vows with a simple gesture, a gentle wind swept across the plains. Jonas felt it on his face and knew that this was not just a moment for them, but a symbol of human resilience. They had faced storms, scavengers, and uncertainty. They had endured, adapted, and thrived, and now together they were unstoppable. The following weeks were a celebration of life and human ingenuity. The ranch prospered as never before. Myra introduced new systems for water conservation, animal care, and crop planting. Jonas found himself learning from her daily, his understanding of the land deepening in ways he could not have imagined. Settlers and travelers came to witness the thriving ranch, inspired by the unusual partnership and the remarkable woman who had transformed it. One afternoon, a trader approached, bringing news of distant colonies struggling against harsh weather and failing crops. Jonas and Myra exchanged a glance. This was their opportunity, not for conquest or profit, but to share knowledge, to spread the ingenuity that had allowed them to thrive. Myra began designing simple but effective tools and methods that could be replicated anywhere. Jonas helped distribute them, teaching others how to observe patterns, solve problems, and endure the harsh worlds of the galaxy. It became clear that their ranch was no longer just a home. It had become a hub of human potential, a living example of what could be achieved through ingenuity, trust, and collaboration. Myra's abilities were extraordinary, but Jonas realized that it was their partnership, their shared respect and creativity, that made the ranch a beacon of hope. As the moons rose over the plains, Jonas and Myra often sat together, observing the land they had shaped. Myra would point out subtle changes, patterns in the herd, or shifts in the soil. Jonas would suggest improvements, combining his experience with her insights. Their conversations were never just words. They were strategies, lessons, and experiments in human potential. One night, as the stars blanketed the sky, Jonas turned to Myra. "Do you ever think about what your life might have been if things were different?" Myra considered the question, her eyes reflecting the silver light. "Perhaps, but it does not matter. I am here. I have survived. I have learned, and now I have you. That is enough." Jonas felt a deep, unwavering certainty. Myra was not just a companion. She was proof that humans, even in the harshest corners of the galaxy, could endure, adapt, and thrive. Her intelligence, her resilience, and her creativity were a testament to the potential within every human being. The days turned into months, and the ranch continued to prosper. Animals thrived under Myra's guidance, crops flourished in the challenging soil, and new settlers arrived, drawn by the success of Jonas and Myra's partnership. Together, they created a community built on ingenuity, trust, and respect for life itself. Jonas often reflected on the strange auction where he had purchased Myra for one credit. It had seemed absurd at the time, almost foolish. But now, he understood that it had been the beginning of something extraordinary. A lonely rancher and a mysterious woman had come together, proving that even in the most isolated corners of the universe, humans could achieve greatness. Myra, too, found a sense of belonging she had never known. For years she had survived alone, guided by observation and instinct. Now she had a partner who understood her, who respected her, and who shared her vision of survival, growth, and human ingenuity. Together, they were unstoppable. One evening, as the suns dipped below the horizon, Jonas and Myra walked through the pasture, the herd moving calmly around them. Jonas stopped and looked at Myra, feeling the full weight of the life they had built together. "You've changed everything," he said softly. "And you," Myra replied, "have made it possible." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the plains stretch endlessly, filled with possibilities. Then, hand in hand, they returned to the barn, ready to face whatever challenges the universe might throw their way. Jonas realized that their story was more than a personal journey. It was a testament to the human spirit, a demonstration that even in the harshest worlds, humans could endure, adapt, and create. And as long as they worked together, nothing could stop them. The twin moons rose high, casting silver light over the thriving ranch. In that quiet glow, Jonas and Myra smiled at each other, knowing that they had found more than survival, more than companionship. They had found a future filled with possibility, partnership, and proof that humans were extraordinary. The lonely rancher and the woman from the bag had come together for one simple reason: trust, ingenuity, and human resilience. And in doing so, they had proven that even the smallest actions, a single credit, a simple choice could change the course of a life, a ranch, and perhaps even the universe. The red plains of Orlia 7 stretched endlessly, alive with life, hope, and the extraordinary potential of humans. And Jonah's car, once a lonely rancher, knew he would never be alone again.